Welcome to She Rebel Radio, the podcast for high-performing women leaders who want to unlearn conventional rules, leave prestigious careers, and launch businesses of significance. Each week, She Rebel Radio brings you insights and advice from women entrepreneurs who transformed their prestige prisons into daring entrepreneurial success stories. Now, here is your host, Lulu Nins.
Welcome to episode 46 of She Rebel Radio, discovering our cultural inheritance with Bethany Webster. Bethany is considered a global expert on healing the mother wound, something we inherit to varying degrees as women living in a patriarchal society. To heal this core wound, Bethany teaches women how to discover their own inner mother. Bethany is the author of the forthcoming book entitled Discovering the Inner Mother, a guide to healing the mother wound and claiming your power, which is due to be published in January 2021. Bethany, it's amazing to have you here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Lulu. Thanks so much for inviting me today.
I'm super happy to have you. And as I shared just before we hit record, you are our first American guest on She Rebel Radio. So big welcome. We have a good UK following. So it's really good to share the incredible work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. It's wonderful to be your first American guest. And I have a huge place in my heart for the UK. So it feels special to connect with your audience this way.
Yeah, like She Rebel badge of honor of our first American guest. So I'm really excited to dive in. So to ask the first question is, as women, what is our cultural inheritance?
Yes. Well, I see the cultural inheritance that we have as women coming kind of from two different areas. One is the culture itself, which for thousands of years now has been, obviously a patriarchal culture with men being the more dominant and women are thought to be less than. And the other part of our cultural inheritance it's how it's filtered through our families. So we get this message from birth that we are less than. And this is a kind of a toxic atmosphere that it gets reinforced through so many different ways, in the culture itself, through media, schools, churches, every place. It's kind of baked in to the world that we live in. And then what I teach about the mother wound is really how it's filtered through our mothers, how in the best of situations, our moms often pass messages along to us that reinforce that message that we're less than. And this is not malevolent or, bad intentioned. It's more just an innocent way to try to help us survive a male world. So it could be messages like, don't rock the boat, don't be too big, don't, put other people's needs before yourself. And this is often in an effort to protect us, to help us to get through a male world. And even for those of us who have great relationships with our mothers and our mothers themselves may have been very empowered, we still get these messages. And the mother wound is really, the work that I do around it is, I say that the mother wound is the seat of our most debilitating beliefs and patterns. And the reason why that is because those beliefs about how to survive as a woman living in a patriarchy were fused with our deepest human needs for love, safety, and belonging. So when we got these messages, we inherited them either covertly, through watching our mothers, her choices and patterns, or just overtly through what she taught us. We learned how to be a woman from her, and it got really filtered into those needs for approval, validation, to belong, to be approved of, our deepest human needs. So when you blend those two together, what we have is a lot of, deeply unconscious beliefs about our limitations, and it manifests in so many different ways, and how we limit ourselves, how we hold ourselves back, how we silence ourselves. And often this stuff is super unconscious. We don't even realize we're doing it. And so my work is really all about helping women to kind of be more aware of the mother wound, that it's personal in the sense that it's from our mothers, but on a larger level, it's our cultural inheritance. It's what we've, on a very impersonal kind of collective macro level, it's what we have inherited from our mothers, our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, as well as women as a whole across time and space. So I think we're at a crucial time right now in 2020 with everything that's happening in the world. Every day it seems like there's another crisis, and it just keeps happening. So it's pushing us, I think, to really look, to really see where do these problems originate? How am I living my life? And what's not working for me? And how did I inherit these beliefs and patterns that have been causing issues for me, so that I can really start to break out of that, to heal that, to move beyond what I call the maternal horizon, that place where our families and our cultures have said, don't you dare go here. This isn't safe. But those are precisely the places we need to go. I think the world is really needing more than ever empowered women who are ready to disrupt patterns, things that aren't working, the status quo, business as usual. None of these things are working anymore. So we need women who can go beyond. Yeah. And really the way to go beyond is really starting within ourselves.
So can I ask, within that, there's so, much packed information in there, and I'm sure women
I know it's a lot.
having so many aha moments, going, oh my god. You use the word baked, which it's baked into society. It's baked into us. And also, a word that really stood out to me was this survive, that we have been taught as women. It's almost an instinctual survival mechanism. Definitely. To stay safe. Does that
Yes, it is true. Yeah, I say our biggest goal is to really survive, and for the inner child, who's a living energy inside of us, it's really about inner safety. And she can be the inner child. There's been a lot of talk about the inner child for decades now, but the work I do kind of talks about inner mothering. How do we mother that child in us? And so I'd like to think of the inner child as kind of the gatekeeper of our upper limits. If she doesn't feel safe, she will shut down the project or the relationship or anything that doesn't feel safe. So our algorithms for safety are built upon what we inherited, what we learned from the culture and from our families. And they operate outside our awareness in our everyday lives. And so it's really kind of cracking the code on how do we create safety for ourselves. That means, safety means speaking our truth. Safety means, being prosperous, being in healthy romantic relationships, all the things that we desire and know that we deserve. How do we make those things safe?
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that and I've been talking about this on She Rebel Radio over the last couple of months with the pandemic, that everybody's feeling of safety has been shaken around the core, that is a real invitation for women to find that internal safety?
Exactly. And I think that's really the opportunity, the crisis and the opportunity. And for many of us, safety meant, what does the outside world need from me? How do I please? My safety depends on other people liking me, approving of me. And we actually need to go beyond that. Safety isn't what the external world is for us. Because if you think about it, that's really unsafe, right? The external world's definitions and expectations and obligations. But that's what a child in our development, a child's safety is definitely predicated on the outside world, and our mothers in particular. So if we don't do this kind of inner accounting, this kind of inner evaluation, examination, inquiry, then we're just kind of operating that way. Still as women, looking to the outside for, am I good? Am I safe? Am I lovable? And that is such a deeply exhausting and unhealthy and not safe way to live. So this whole work that I do is all about creating that inner safety inside ourselves. And when we do that over time, this is not a quick or glamorous process, but when we do this, when we embark on this path, we do start to build an inner safety within ourselves, and everything starts to reorganize around that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the fun really begins.
And do you, and again, I've been talking about this inner safety on She Rebel recently, that patriarchy in particular has conditioned women to feel that safety is external and not internal, more than it has to men. Because as you mentioned, children are looking for that external safety. It seems that women are looking for that external safety more than men are, for example.
Yeah, it's definitely different for men, for sure. Because I mean, patriarchy for certain, damages both men and women, but because it really privileges men, their wound is different. And, they're kind of sold a different lie.
Yeah.
The lie being that they don't have to work on themselves. They can just shut down their emotions, and that's part of safety.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for men, it's like figuring out actually my emotions, my emotional self, my feminine side, my depth is safe. That's true safety, not this bravado, macho, shut down, achievement oriented way. That's the kind of wound they have to work on. And I don't envy them. There's a lot of work to be done.
Totally.
Yeah.
Agree. Yeah, definitely. So with the mother wound, and going back to women, as is the She Rebel Radio listeners, although we may have some men listening. With the mother wound, there are 4 levels. I've heard you talk about 4 levels. So can you tell the listener what those 4 levels are?
Sure. Yeah. So the mother wound, just a quick side note before I dive into that, the mother wound is a phrase that's been around and just tossed around a bit from different authors through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but no one had ever really defined what is the mother wound? How does it manifest? What are the symptoms? What's the path to healing? So that's really what I've done in my work. I'm really aiming to fill a crucial gap in our understanding of female empowerment and how to, and this is really the new frontier. Even though talk about mother-daughter relationships has been around, of course, it hasn't really been in the mainstream. And my goal is to really make this known and really bridge the gap between our cultural wound and the personal. So let me dive in now to how I define the mother wound as 4 levels. So the personal level is the first level, and that's where we see it the most, is within our own lives. Mm-hmm. So the personal mother wound is a set of internalized beliefs and patterns that originated with our mothers that cause us to limit ourselves, to keep ourselves small, quiet, and invisible. So that's the personal mother wound. It's like whatever the dynamics were with our mothers, what that caused us to believe about ourselves and the world that makes us feel small and limited and unsafe. Mm-hmm. That's the personal level. The next level is the cultural mother wound. And this is all about how the feminine, everything that's female, is considered weak, inferior, less than, across culture. So across, governments, media, churches, schools, you name it, it's reinforced in all these different levels. And our society is crippled as a result. You could say emotionally stunted,
unbalanced,
exactly. And then that's a nice way to say it. Unbalanced for sure. And then the third level is the spiritual mother wound. And this is all about how, in those early hours and days and weeks of our lives when we were infants, mother was everything. Mother was food. Mother was breath. Mother was body. So we began life fused with our mothers. And so the very person that was our mother, her beliefs, her values, the way she saw the world was really what we started with. And part of that has to do with life itself. Like, is life trustworthy? And also our relationship with a higher power. Do I belong on this planet? Do I belong in this body? So when we have a deep mother wound, it can contribute to this sense of feeling lost, separate, disconnected from life itself. And this is deep. This goes to a very existential level of, do we belong here? Right?
Yeah.
And then the final level is what I call the planetary mother wound. And this is all about our planet that is a female, that is a mother. And collectively we've, been looking at her as an object to objectify, to extract from. And we have all these issues around climate change and deforestation and mass extinction of species. So this is the planetary mother wound. So there's four levels, and it really all hinges, in my opinion, on the personal. The more of us that do this deep work on healing our personal mother wound, the more we actually contribute to the healing of our spiritual mother wound, our collective, planetary mother wound. And I think there's an evolutionary step, overall that there's an evolutionary opportunity inside the mother wound, where when we do our own work, when we dive deep into, our own pain in this area, I think we have an opportunity for humanity as a whole to take a leap. And I say this because, as someone who's walked this path myself in a deep way, it's like there's a pain in there that we need to face, right? There's a deep pain. And when we face it, it has the opportunity to birth us into a whole new level of compassion. Compassion for ourselves, for each other, for the earth, for all life. And I hope, it's my prayer that as more of us do this work, that we can create a culture and a world and a relationship with ourselves and the earth that's based on compassion and empathy. These are profound, female, feminine intelligence that we're talking about. And I think that's where we're going. That is where we're going for sure. Like, patriarchy is an era that's about to end. It's ending as we speak. And what's coming in its place is something profound. If we answer the call of this crisis, this time of crisis, to do the deep work.
Yeah, and this real growing, including the last episode of She Rebel, of this like growing sense of responsibility as women to contribute to the evolution of women and the feminine. Like that's the call, that's the nudge to do.
That's the nudge. And I want to say too, something I see a lot is that there's this kind of ungrounded desire, like, let's heal, the feminine must rise and the sacred feminine. And I get a little like, I'm like, yeah, I'm on board with that. That's exactly where we're going. But if we don't look at where we came from and the ways that we feel in exile from the feminine, then we actually replicate underneath the guise of the rising feminine, the same female wounds, which is competition, comparison, cutting each other down, stealing from one another, manipulation, all of these shadow feminine stuff is playing out. I see it playing out all over the place in these sacred feminine circles. And so my call is for everybody to slow down. And the way that we move forward is not by rushing, and I know it's exciting, and it truly is exciting, but we have to ground ourselves and do the deep work of looking at our childhoods and how the repeating patterns that we keep seeing in our lives are repeating themselves. And we have to go back. It's kind of counterintuitive, but in order to move forward, we have to look back. In order to progress, we have to temporarily regress. We have to look at the past. We have to look at the root. And when we get to the root, then we can actually build something that's sustainable and healthy and for the long term. Does that make sense? Yeah.
The shadow work has to be done. And again, there's a big, contraction is the key to expansion. We've had a big period of contraction and invitation to actually do the work and not be running ahead and to continue to do it, right? It's always
right. It's a long-term
work
thing
to be done.
For sure. Mm-hmm.
Pardon?
I said, it's a long-term, it's a long-term process. And my goal is to really give people the tools and the mindset so that you can do this over the long term. It's like by changing intergenerational wounding, by really healing it and addressing it, that's how we change the course of things for the generations of the future. And so it's a real, the women who are drawn to this work, it's like deep pioneering work, because it's not gorgeous and beautiful and blissful and in the stratosphere. It's more like those moments of being, doing your work with, in therapy or in groups, with a coach, but in those moments where you're really uncovering and facing some of the stuff that we just don't want to face, and that our culture, we don't have many models, of what it means to do the deep work and work through it and come out the other side. And we don't have many models of that yet. So we're being called to be the ones to have the really deep courage to look at the mess, to look at the, things we'd rather not look at, and look at the pain and lean into our pain and lean into our discomfort. That's where the gold is. That's where all that we're looking for is found, is in the mess and in the goo. But we have to go there with support and with the right tools.
Yeah, it's not all skipping down the yellow brick road.
Yeah, it's so much better than that. But it's like we have to temporarily be willing to depart from that happy ending fantasy to get to the real gold that's inside of our pain. Yeah.
And I think the online world, it can be a real contribution to, kind of glorifying that road, right? Whereas, there's the darkness and the shadow work that needs to be done. So within that, how does the mother wound feed into the roles that so many women play, that we all have played, is in the emotional caretaker, the people pleaser, the approval seeker, the overachiever? I know every single woman listening will recognize herself in at least one of those, if not all.
Yes, totally. And I'd love to go into that. And maybe something that might be helpful to your readers, I might share a little bit of my own story, because I don't want anyone to think listening that I just figured this out and I just woke up one day and I figured it all out and it was easy for me. So my story briefly, and I'll weave in your answer to this. As a young girl, I played the role of my mother's caretaker, counselor, therapist, kind of like from a young age, I was like taught to be my mother's best friend and her confidant. So I grew up as a total people pleaser, overachiever. I learned early in life that I was a good girl when I didn't exist, when I was invisible, when I didn't have needs, when I didn't ask anything of my mother or my father. I really played like the role of a mediator. I protected my brother from my father. I protected everybody from each other. But I didn't get any emotional support myself. So I just tried to be invisible. And I learned that actually that's how I could get love and approval. And then in college, I felt completely adrift. And as a young woman, my pain started to surface. I started having issues with food, with my body image, with work stuff, with romantic relationships that were crash and burn. So my symptoms started to show up. And then I got myself in therapy at 19, and I've been in therapy with the same therapist, brilliant feminist therapist now for 22 years. So I started super early. When shit started to hit the fan in my life, I immediately got support, and I was really lucky to find her early in life, and I just continued. But in the beginning, I really avoided looking at my relationship with my mother. I was like, hell no, I don't want to go there. That's scary. It makes me feel guilty. So I just kind of tiptoed around it. But my therapist was like, nope, at some point when you're ready, we're going to have to look at this. And I was like, for I think 5 years, I was like, I'm not ready. But eventually I saw that everything in my life pointed back to my relationship with my mother. I started to see the themes, in my romantic relationships. It was always about, being the teacher, the mentor, the healer to everybody else in my life. And then being resentful and feeling invisible and feeling empty. So I was like, you know what? I got to start looking at my relationship with my mother. So fast forward, it was extremely painful. It was dark and hard and really uncomfortable and painful. But there were waves where I started to feel like, wow, I'm actually, for the first time in my life, feeling like I belong in my body, like I belong on this planet. I started just having these kind of awakening moments of like feeling deeply connected to all life. And I thought to myself, why isn't anyone talking about this? Why isn't anyone talking about, like the mother wound is so key, so crucial. So I reached a kind of a breaking point with my family. It was like I had been in therapy already, I think, for 15 years at this point, and I started to be more empowered. I started to set boundaries. I started to speak my truth. I started to not, tolerate certain things. And I started to want to have a good relationship with my mother that was equal, that wasn't just me being invisible. I wanted us to have like a real connection. And as soon as I did that and spoke up, like lovingly and compassionately, like I really, this isn't working for me, this dynamic, let's change it. Are you on board? And my mother was just like, nope. And basically the whole family imploded. And it was like, I saw my family members trying to get me back into that role of good girl, people pleaser, the object that makes them feel good about themselves, the quiet one that goes along with their illusions and doesn't argue. It was like everyone in my family, my brother, my extended family, like my aunts, everybody was like, why can't you just get over this and like be the way you were? Like, and I was like, wow, it felt like it echoed that larger cultural mandate for us as women that says, don't speak up for yourself, don't have your own needs, put everybody first, don't rock the boat, don't make people uncomfortable, don't set boundaries. Like it was all coming up. The more I addressed my personal mother wound, I saw coming out of the mouths of my family, the wider cultural mandate that says, don't you dare try to own yourself and be a separate person. So unfortunately, I had to go no contact. I'm one of those women who had to actually go, have no contact at all with my family members. Of course, it's very painful and it's been a tough road and a lonely road at times.
Yeah.
But it's actually been the most empowering thing that I've ever had to do, because in that process, I really learned what it takes to speak one's truth and to really make one's integrity. And this is really what it comes down to for me, is truth and integrity. When you make that the bedrock of your life, you don't need to worry so much about these other things. And that started to become the most nourishing force for me, was my integrity. And knowing that speaking my truth, when I do that, it's nourishing others, even if they don't get it, or even if they misperceive me or misinterpret or disagree, that I have a nourishment inside myself, my own integrity, that I can rely on no matter what is happening. And so it's been like a spiritual journey. And, but ultimately it's like coming out the other side. And of course, I'm always working on, residues of my mother wound. I still get triggered and have moments of deep healing that I'm working through. But as I do it, it's just more and more, feeling stronger in myself and really of service, a sense that my safety doesn't depend on other people getting me, wanting me, and that's real freedom. And that's kind of the gospel that I talk about, is we need women it's basically like our sense of reference point shifts from the outside to the inside. And when that reference point has shifted, then it's a whole different ball game. It's a whole different ball game, because you can really be free in so many different levels, where the confines of family and cultural approval are no longer holding you back and holding you hostage. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Total internal reference point. And that, it's the feminine, it's real feminine power, right?
Yes. And it doesn't mean that, I just want to say one more thing. Like, it doesn't mean we don't need others. It doesn't mean that we don't consider other people. I don't want to intimate that at all, but it's more like, for the primary source of your affirmation and support, it's within.
Yeah. Has to be within.
To be.
That is a real journey for women. So why do you think women are reluctant? You mentioned the word guilt. To heal this. Why do you think women don't want to do the work?
Totally. There's so many reasons. And, for me, it was always like, if I've, in the culture, it's just like, mothers are all knowing. They're either all good, like holy next to God, or they're blamed for everything. So it's like our relationship our culture has a really fucked up relationship with mothers, where they're either deified and idealized, or completely minimized and devalued. So when I was considering looking at my relationship with my mother for healing and insight, I felt immediately guilty, because there was no cultural reference point for looking to one's childhood for insight and healing. It was like, if you look at this, if you're angry at your mother, or if you have stress or tension with her, you're bad. You're a bad daughter. You're ungrateful. How dare you? She gave you life. She's the only mother you've ever had. She tried her best. All these messages. So there's a lot of cultural resistance that's built up that says, don't you dare go here. This is the no-go zone. It's taboo. And so I really did postpone this for 5 years. And then I realized, holy mackerel, this is where our power is. No wonder there's so much demonizing of daughters about this issue, because Lord, if we go here, the world is going to change really rapidly and in a very drastic way. Because
what about the women that feel that they've got a very good relationship with their mothers?
yes, some women do feel like they have a great relationship with their mothers on a personal level. And yet I talk to so many who come to me into my courses and talks and things because they sense that even though it's harmonious between them, that there's some unfinished business there, and that a lot of the patterns that hold them back come from their mothers. But, things like, don't prioritize yourself, or, don't rock the boat, don't go outside these lines. Those can still be passed along from mothers who deeply love their daughters and who, support them completely. So you can have a great relationship with your mother and have a deep struggle with especially the cultural mother wound, which is this basically how patriarchy has really distorted our relationship with ourselves and with other women and with men. It really comes down to like that relationship of what's possible for us as women, what's okay and what's not okay. And what's the line? And a lot of us have been taught to stay within very small confines.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this morning. I was sitting on the beach and thinking, God, at school, always being the rebel, although I kind of got away with it because I never really looked that way. I totally had I rejected religion, science, psychology later on because, women are totally missing from the conversation, although I couldn't have articulated that. But it was my mom introduced me to so many like empowered women in culture. So Frida Kahlo, Lee Miller, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her work. I was just wondering kind of like how that sits, because I was like, God, I was lucky, to have my mum who actually introduced me to female role models.
Yes, I love that. And I hear that a lot from women as well, that their mothers actually supported their flourishing and their independence and autonomy.
And rule breaking, because that's always been something I haven't had a problem with.
Yes. And so it's a few different things. Like today we've talked mainly just using my story as kind of a reference point, but there's a lot of different ways this can manifest. Some of us go the rebel way and say, hell no. They might have mothers who pressured them, to be small, and they might say, hell no, I'm not going to believe you. And they go into the kind of the more rebel way where they just do their own thing.
Yeah, which whenever you keep on saying that, I keep on coming up to the hell no to the Mary.
Hell no, exactly. But also sometimes that resistance and that rebellion can also have a mother wound in it for some of us, because it's still in reaction to the mother. It's still controlling the daughter's behavior. It's just going in the opposite direction. Instead of compliance, she goes into defiance. But what we really want to go to is the middle way, where we're really choosing our behavior and our patterns from a really divinely like original self inside of you, not in reaction to one way or the other. No. But the other thing you were saying was, another thing I see a lot too, though, is women whose mothers were very supportive, like go for it, liberation, autonomy, but their behavior, I'm not saying this is true for you, but it is for some people, like their mother's behavior can still be quite patriarchal, meaning power over, compliance is enforced in some other way, maybe not in the explicit, overt beliefs, but more in the behavior. And that can be really confusing, because if one's mother is like, I love you, do whatever you want, you're free, I want you to have everything, but then her behavior is saying something completely different, it can be really confusing. So there's so many different manifestations and ways, as you can see, that this can play out. That
kind of brings home the like, do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly. Right.
go out there, break the walls, do this, do that. But, I hear you with that. For sure.
So a good reference point for people is to kind of ask yourself, where has this power over come into my life? it can be an interesting like reflection on, because patriarchy is definitely the power over, right? Power for power's sake, the energy of domination and control. So where has this shown up in your life, in your relationships, in your childhood? How in your childhood home was this power over manifesting? And it could be with mother and father, or one or the other, or even in like the churches or the schools. We want to look at patriarchy as a whole through that lens, and then how that got passed down to us through our mothers. I'd like to say the most insidious forms of patriarchy are passed through the mother, because they're deeply fused with our identities. If that makes sense.
And almost like as a vibrational level, right? In terms of, as you said, that feeding from, mum's everything, when we're growing and evolving to being here and on earth.
Right, because at this level, sometimes we can see the pattern we want to release, that it doesn't serve us anymore, but it can feel like part of our identity, or it can feel like mother, right? So there's a deep resistance to releasing some of these patterns, even though our intellect and our adult self can see they don't serve us. But on a deeper level, that's why I go into the work of the inner child, that's inner safety algorithm that we need to work with in order to truly release it. So there's like a bond. We need to create a bond inside of us with the inner mother, and we become a mother to ourselves that we always needed. Whatever that we missed with our own mothers, we can reparent, remother ourselves. And through that inner bond that develops over time, we start to release. The inner child feels safe enough to release some of these long-held limiting patterns, and we can go beyond the maternal horizon and into our true original destiny, really.
Beautiful. And why, and we've touched on this already, such an incredible conversation, why do we have the responsibility to break the cycle for other women of the cultural inheritance, our cultural inheritance, no matter, where it resonates with us?
Yeah. I think that I really see this intergenerational healing work as a real privilege, because so many of our mothers, our great grandmothers, our ancestors did not have the tools or the mindsets or the fortitude or the willingness to do this kind of work. So I consider it a true miracle that so many of us around the world right now are feeling called. We're feeling tired, frankly, exhausted with what we've seen, with what we've endured, with what we've tolerated. It's time for a change. We're at a crucial point where we want to change. And we have tools, and we have resources and insights and methods that can help us to really change the future. Because here's the thing. I see healing the mother wound as the epitome of generational responsibility. Because whatever we don't deal with, we pass on.
Yeah.
We were repressed or oppressed, abused, traumatized. We have to take responsibility for that, or we will be the oppressor and the traumatizer. And it's not like, that's not a judgment. It's not like, making you into, it's not like a value judgment. It's just the way we're built. Our system prefers the familiar. So we'll do whatever we were taught. We're just going to keep doing that. So I think it's a huge, growing edge for humanity to do this deep work. And we must do it, because the mother wound is planetary, it's spiritual, it's cultural, it's every level. And what a beautiful expression of life, of your life, to take on that responsibility and to change the course of things. That's why I say this is the most important work that we must do. And because we're dealing with our blueprint, like the literal way that we feel ourselves to be, the way that we see the world. So when we work on this blueprint level, the self, we can change the world. We do. Even epigenetics and interpersonal neurobiology, there's science that actually tells us that we are changing our brains. And as we change our brains, we're changing the culture. And as we change the culture, we are changing our relationships with the earth, and everything new things become possible. There's the saying, the space between stimulus and response is where our freedom lies. Viktor Frankl said that in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. So this work is really what helps us expand that space between stimulus and response, that learned conditioning. And as we do that, we create new neurocircuitry in our brains. We can see new solutions. We can see new possibilities. But if we if we don't do this work, we just keep being reactive and replicating things. And frankly, life is too short. Life is too short.
Yeah.
Your life is too precious to just repeat the cultural and familial patterns that have caused you suffering. That we get to be the ones, like how cool is that? We get to be the ones that get to change things. And so let's do it, and let's do it together.
Yeah, and I love how that message is, so deep in terms of it being twofold. Is one, because I think women often, with the internal work can be, it's selfish to do all this work and make it all about me, right?
Right, exactly.
We're conditioned to do the opposite. So we need another reason, to do it. And again, so many people, we see it, don't we? And I think, the pandemic has kind of blown this up even more, as it does magnified, this trying to externally fix the problem when really the solution's always within.
Yes, it's a cliche and it's totally true. And it's totally true that the answer is within. And so then it becomes about support, because nobody can do this by themselves. I've been in therapy for 22 years with someone who's brilliant and a trauma specialist. I think that's really what has helped me the most, is to be in this super long term, to go all out and to really go to the uttermost, really go for it. Because listen, there's no better investment than yourself.
Yeah.
And then we are in a process of deconstructing so that we can reconstruct from a new level. And you are worth it. You are worth the time it takes to work on yourself, to heal yourself. You are worth all the resources, time, energy, and money. And because you are the point of change, you are the point of power. So I invite you to step into those mindsets, everyone, to really feel into that this is your time, this is your life, and you can do it, and it's worth it. Even though it sucks and it's hard and it's lonely at times, it's so worth it. And as someone who has walking the journey still every day, that this is the journey, this is the path. And
I think that's such an important message as well, as is when we open this conversation of this conditioning that women are worth less, then
right.
That investment of time, of money, of energy, all of that can feel even harder. So incredible message. And I would love, before we go, for you to share what's next for you, what's coming next.
Yes. So what I do, as a coach, I'm not a trauma therapist or a psychologist or anything. I do have degrees in psychology, but I'm a writer, a speaker, and a coach. And so I've created a 7-step process that kind of maps the journey of how to heal the mother wound. And a lot of women that work with me either work with therapists at the same time. Some of them do, some of them don't. It's not required, but it's, for those of us who have, extreme levels or severe abuse or trauma in your history, I definitely recommend it. And I offer support and how to find, it's all about support, right? It's like the inner mothering and self-care and everything. So I teach a 7-step process in an online course. And I'm happy to report that we just had more women than ever join this course back in May. Every Mother's Day, I do a promotion, and also around the holidays. But it's available anytime. People can step into the course. It's available on my website, which is bethanywebster.com. And I do also private mentoring for women leaders who want to step more into their power and service in the world. So I work at that level as well, one-on-one. And I have a book coming out January 5th, 2021. It's my first book, and it's going to be part memoir that kind of tells my story, and then also kind of a guide for how to discover the inner mother, heal the mother wound, and step into your personal power. So that comes out in January. Very excited.
Amazing. Yeah, really excited. Can't wait to get a copy of that in January. And we will put all your links and social media links in the show notes. It's been incredible to have you on and to share, the incredible work that you're doing. Is there any last messages of wisdom that you want to share with the She Rebel Radio listeners?
Oh, Lulu, thank you so much for having me. It's been amazing to be your guest and connect with your audience. And I would just say to everybody who's listening to get fierce. Yeah, get fierce and see yourself as a rebel, see yourself as a pioneer, and in that fierceness, lean into the pain, lean into your discomfort, lean into the places, whatever that means to you. I mean, it could mean just like hanging in there a little bit longer with some grief or with some anger that comes up for you, but lean into the discomfort, make the discomfort bring to it a curiosity instead of shying away from it or running away from it or avoiding it or numbing out. And believe me, I've been there in all those places. But that our power comes from our willingness to lean into the fragmentation, those places that feel broken and messy, it might feel like they're too overwhelming, but actually they are not. You are more powerful. You are more spacious than any emotion, than any negative feeling. And so the way we discover that is to just begin to open to those places. And a way that you can start doing that is, get a picture of yourself as a little girl and put it somewhere where you see it every day. Some of you might already do this. And if you do, step it up a notch, connect with that little girl in some way. You could say to her every day, I see you. I love you for exactly who you are. Or I'm here for you now, little one. Find a way to connect with that little girl inside of you and lean in a little bit to those places that feel painful. And, imagine giving that little girl a hug in those moments,
Yeah, and it's creating more and more safety, isn't it? The more safety, the deeper, the more safety, the deeper. And I love a quote of Frida Kahlo came into mind of become your own muse.
Oh, I love that.
And the person that you know best is you. So that's what it's all about, isn't it? Becoming your own muse.
It is. Thank you so much, Lulu, for having me. It's been really wonderful.
Oh, it's been amazing to have you. Have an amazing rest of the day.
You too. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening to She Rebel Radio, the podcast for high-performing women leaders who want to unlearn conventional rules, leave prestigious careers, and launch businesses of significance. She Rebel Radio is executive produced and hosted by women's advocate and coach Lulu Mims. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another episode. You can find Lulu Mims on Facebook and LinkedIn at Lulu Mims and on Instagram at LuluMims_biz. Until next week, keep rebelling against the rules and designing success your way.